Welcome to The Explainer. Now we're going to kick things off today with a concept that might make you squirm a little bit. Every single person you interact with is actually engaged in this constant, largely unconscious struggle for power. We're doing a brutally honest breakdown of Robert Greene's famous book, The 48 Laws of Power. And listen, we aren't going to talk about how we wish power worked in some utopian, ideal world. Nope, we're looking at how it actually operates in messy, everyday reality.
So, let's dive right into this. Have you ever felt completely outmaneuvered at the office and you just had absolutely no idea how it even happened? We've all been sold this really comforting illusion, right? The idea that if you just keep your head down and do good work, the work will speak for itself. Well, actually, scratch that. Denying that power dynamics exist doesn't just make them magically disappear. It just makes you blind to the constant tug of war happening literally all around you, while other people are actively using it to their advantage.
Which brings us to this incredibly powerful perspective. Know your enemy. Know the game. I really want you to view this explainer as your personal survival guide. People love to label Greene's laws as this evil, manipulative toolkit, but honestly, what they really are is essential defensive awareness. Understanding these laws doesn't mean you have to endorse them. It just means you can spot them coming a mile away. Because ignorance isn't protection. It is pure vulnerability.
Theme 1. The Ego Trap.
Okay, Law 1. Never outshine the master. Here's the deal. In any hierarchy, the person above you desperately needs to feel secure in their position. If your brilliance happens to make them feel inferior, oh boy, you just triggered their deepest insecurities. And let's be brutally honest here. Insecure people in positions of power will actively try to destroy anyone who makes them feel threatened. It sounds intense, but this is a dynamic that plays out in modern corporate workplaces constantly.
It's a pretty simple but devastating trap. You display your talent openly. You accidentally trigger the boss's ego, and boom, you suffer the consequences. Think about Nicolas Fouquet, the finance minister to King Louis XIV. Fouquet threw this incredibly lavish, over-the-top party just to showcase his wealth and his impeccable taste, really just trying to impress his king. But the king? Yeah, he wasn't impressed at all. He felt deeply threatened. Within weeks, Fouquet was arrested, and he spent the rest of his entire life in prison. Why? Simply because he outshone his master.
Now, let's think about the people you choose to surround yourself with. Law 2 explores the completely counterintuitive dangers of hiring friends. Working with friends can actually be incredibly dangerous in power dynamics. Why? Because they feel entitled, they can get overly emotional, and their expectations of you are usually impossibly high. Enemies, on the other hand, they are desperate to prove themselves. Greene brings up this fascinating example of a Chinese emperor who deliberately promoted a former bitter rival to a massive position of power. And since that former enemy had zero personal goodwill to draw from, keeping his job depended entirely on actually delivering results. It made him fiercely loyal and highly effective. Crazy, right?
Theme 2. The Information Game.
Law 3 is all about concealing your intentions with decoys. Look, if people know your true plans, they have time to prepare a defense or figure out how to manipulate you. Greene uses this brilliant example of a con artist who used small, consistently winning bets just to build trust with his marks. Those small early wins, they were the decoy. They completely masked his real underlying intention to eventually wipe them out with one massive, devastating con. If you keep people in the dark, they literally cannot mobilize against you.
Which naturally brings us to Law 4. Silence is not just the absence of words. It's a highly disciplined tool of power. Let me say that again. A tool of power. When you talk too much, you are making yourself vulnerable. You completely strip your words of their weight and their gravity. The most powerful people in the room usually speak the least. They just let everyone else fill the uncomfortable, awkward void with words that almost always reveal way more than they intended to.
So how does this actually play out in our modern world? Well, when you stay quiet, you force the other person to keep talking. Think about your next job interview or a big salary negotiation. The person who speaks the least is usually the one holding the most leverage. Even online, right? On social media, we live in a culture that is constantly pushing us to overshare, to just talk nonstop. So having the discipline of silence is incredibly rare. And as we all know, rarity creates immense value.
This leads to a really critical, maybe slightly paranoid question for Law 14. Are you posing as a friend, or are you actually working as a spy? In highly competitive environments, networking with a specific purpose allows you to gather vital intelligence. By simply appearing super sympathetic, asking really good questions, and then, crucially, just listening, people will inevitably spill their hidden talents, their petty dissatisfactions, or even their next big career moves. Information is the ultimate currency of power, and strategic friendship is exactly how you mint it.
Theme 3. The Reputation Economy.
Law 5 is simple but intense. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. Your reputation is basically the cornerstone of your power. Why? Because it precedes you into every room, and it shapes exactly how every single one of your actions is interpreted by others. Greene explores this wild story of a Chinese general who deliberately weaponized his reputation for being completely and totally unpredictable. His enemies never had a clue if he was going to be merciful or utterly ruthless on any given day. And honestly, that reputation alone kept them so anxious and cautious that it effectively deterred them from ever attacking.
Building right on top of that is Law 6, court attention at all costs. Basically, what is unseen counts for absolutely nothing. Think about P.T. Barnum, the ultimate showman. He famously generated massive controversy and wild spectacles because he deeply understood one thing: negative attention is always, always better than just being invisible. And if you really think about it, this concept has been completely weaponized by today's social media algorithms, hasn't it? Controversy drives engagement, and engagement builds absolute power.
Moving on to Law 11. This one is all about keeping people dependent on you through a very specific 3-step process. First, develop a unique expertise. Second, create irreplaceable systems. And third, relentlessly maintain that dependency. Greene illustrates this perfectly with a story about an ancient court servant who totally monopolized his kingdom's incredibly complex financial records. When the king got annoyed and briefly dismissed him, the entire kingdom practically collapsed into chaos overnight. So, of course, he was quickly reinstated with even more power than before. If people actually need you to survive, your position is basically untouchable.
Advanced tactics and defense.
Let's try and translate some of Greene's historical, cutthroat games into modern corporate equivalents. For example, assuming formlessness today really just means maintaining supreme adaptability in a constantly shifting organizational culture. Mastering timing means having the gut instinct to know exactly when to launch that new project or when to just wait patiently in the weeds for a better opportunity. And boldness? Boldness is about decisive action, because hesitation signals doubt to your competitors, and doubt just invites opposition. By framing your choices carefully and remaining super fluid, you can navigate even the most toxic, complex corporate terrain.
So, what are you actually supposed to do with all this heavy information? Well, here are 3 highly actionable practices you can literally implement this week to start building up your own defensive armor. First up, the power audit. Just quietly observe the power dynamics around you in the office. Don't judge them, just watch. Second, the silence practice. Make a deliberate choice to speak like 20% less in your next meeting and just notice what everyone else reveals to fill the silence. And third, the dependency audit. Take a hard look at who actually depends on you and figure out how you can organically increase your irreplaceable value. And remember, doing these things doesn't make you some evil manipulator. It just makes you intensely strategically aware.
Which brings us right to our final and honestly most essential question for you to chew on. Where is your ethical line? I really want to challenge you right now to define exactly what you will absolutely never do, regardless of whatever strategic advantage it might hand you. Because here is the brutal truth we've unpacked today. The people who actively want power over you, yeah, they are already studying these exact laws. The choice of whether you're going to use this knowledge offensively or defensively is entirely up to you. But just burying your head in the sand, that's simply not an option anymore. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, stay aware and stay sharp.
All right, let's jump right back in. Welcome back to our explainer on Robert Greene's incredibly controversial yet undeniably fascinating masterwork, The 48 Laws of Power. Now, if you caught the first part, you know we covered the fundamentals, the basics of acquiring power. But today, the training wheels are completely coming off. We are diving into part 2. This is the advanced playbook on how ultimate power is maintained, how it's defended, and how it's hidden, right in plain sight.
To make this all digestible, we've organized these complex and honestly, sometimes totally ruthless laws into a practical masterclass grouped by core themes. We'll kick things off with Welcome to the Advanced Game, move into constructing your power persona, then mastering timing and execution, followed by the psychology of influence, formlessness, the ultimate power, and finally wrap up with your defensive playbook. Starting with Section 1. Welcome to the Advanced Game, where we enter the psychological territory of maintaining power.
This quote brilliantly captures the essence of Law 25, which is to recreate yourself. It's a huge reminder that you are absolutely not stuck with the identity you were born into, or even the reputation you've just kind of accidentally picked up over the years. Look, in the advanced game of power, perception literally shapes reality. If you don't take charge and build your own narrative, someone else is going to build it for you, and I guarantee it probably won't be to your advantage. Which brings us to Section 2, Constructing Your Power Persona, the art of reinvention and spectacle. Let's look at how historical heavyweights actually constructed their personas, because history shows us exactly how this is done. Think about Julius Caesar for a second. He carefully, deliberately crafted this public image as the ultimate champion of the common person. He was out there sponsoring massive public spectacles, throwing lavish games, giving these incredibly rousing speeches. He played the part flawlessly, all while he was systematically hoarding absolute dictatorial power behind closed doors. Caesar really understood that identity is constructed. Deliberate reinvention is a massive tool for influence. You aren't just pretending, you are actively becoming what you have decided to be. And that leads right into Law 26, which is all about keeping your hands clean. It's about separating action from appearance. Basically, you have the prince. This is the beloved leader presenting a just, merciful face to the world. And then you have the minister, the intermediary who handles all the dirty work, the highly unpopular decisions, the firings. When the public hatred hits a boiling point, the prince simply steps in, fires the minister, and gets to take all the credit for cleaning house while remaining completely adored by the masses. It is a ruthless separation of duties for sure, but hey, if you've ever seen a CEO blame HR for company-wide layoffs right before taking a massive bonus, you know this stuff happens every single day. Next up is Section 3, Mastering Timing and Execution. We're talking about boldness, planning to the end, and effortless success. Because once you've built the persona, you have to look at action. Law 29 teaches us that you have to plan all the way to the absolute end. Most people are operating entirely in the short term, right? They're thinking about day 1, maybe day 10. But truly powerful people, they are already living in year 1. Greene uses this great analogy of a chess master. A grandmaster seems like they're reading minds. They make a move, and suddenly, bam, you're trapped. But they aren't psychic. They're just reading the board. They've anticipated the outcomes, the obstacles, and all those little unintended consequences long before the game even began. Now, here's where things get really counterintuitive. Ordinary perception tells us that visible struggle is a good thing. It makes us look dedicated, like we want people to see how hard we're hustling. But Law 30 warns against this completely. It says you should hide your grueling practice, those late nights, all that frantic planning. Why? Because it creates the illusion of effortless execution. When your accomplishments seem to just come to you easily, you appear vastly more impressive. You don't just look like a hard worker, you look like a natural genius who is totally untouchable by ordinary stress. It's a real game changer. Moving right along to Section 4, the psychology of influence, where power uses our beliefs, fantasies, and deepest vulnerabilities. Let's pivot to the psychological leverage of power. To really understand Law 33, you have to ask yourself a deeply, deeply uncomfortable question. What is your thumbscrew? Everyone has a weakness, a hidden need, an insecurity, some desperate desire they just cannot fully control. And finding these thumbscrews gives you massive leverage. We all share pretty common vulnerabilities. Maybe it's insecurity about our social status, secret little vices, unfulfilled desires, or hidden fears. The harsh reality is, the person who knows what you desperately need knows exactly how to pressure you. You can use this strategically to read the room in a tough negotiation, sure, but honestly, more importantly, you have to use it defensively to protect your own blind spots. Because if you don't know what your own thumbscrews are, I promise you, someone else is going to find them and turn them. Then there's Law 32, which is all about playing to people's fantasies. The source material tells the story of a great seducer who understood a fundamental, if slightly cynical, truth about human nature. A lot of the time, people actually don't want the harsh truth. Reality is hard, it's messy. When reality is unsatisfying, offering someone an aspirational escape, making them feel special and transformed, practically guarantees their devotion. We literally see this constantly today in luxury marketing or high-stakes political campaigns. They aren't selling you a product or a policy. They are selling the fantasy of who you could become. All right, we are at Section 5, Formlessness, the ultimate power and the pinnacle of the 48 laws. We've reached the climax of this explainer with Law 48. Formlessness is the ultimate strategy of having absolutely no fixed form. It's about being completely adaptable, fluid, and totally impossible to pin down, just like water. Greene leans heavily on martial arts philosophy here. Think about it. If you have a rigid identity, a totally fixed strategy, or a predictable position, your enemies know exactly how to counter you. You give them a solid target to attack. But if you are formless, if you can just become whatever the specific, immediate moment demands, you yield to force, you return it, and you remain utterly impossible to grasp.
Finally, Section 6, your defensive playbook. Let's talk about protecting yourself against all this manipulation. So how do we actually use all this without turning into a comic book villain? We turn these amoral observations into an ethically grounded defensive playbook. Learning this game is absolutely vital. First off, it makes invisible power dynamics visible to you. It gives you a real analytical language so you aren't just left with that vague sinking feeling that you're being outmaneuvered in a meeting. It gives you strategic options. And perhaps most importantly, it corrects naive idealism. Understanding these laws does not mean you are endorsing the manipulation. It just corrects the naive idea that doing good work alone will always be magically rewarded, ensuring you never end up as an easy target. To wrap things up, here are 3 concrete steps straight from the source text that you can take this week to build up your awareness. Number 1, the law of the day. Just pick one law every morning and quietly observe your workplace to see if you spot it in action. Number 2, the defensive analysis. Look back at a time you felt really outmaneuvered and try to figure out exactly which law was used against you. And number 3, and this is by far the most important, the ethical line. You have to establish your own boundaries right now, in the cold light of day, well before a high-stakes situation forces your hand. You need to know exactly what you will absolutely never do. So I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on today. Which of these laws was used against you recently? Seriously, take a moment to really reflect on that. The source material gives us a stark mirror of human nature without any of those comforting filters. You don't have to become ruthless yourself, but you really can no longer afford to be ignorant. Keep your eyes open, because awareness is always your first and greatest countermeasure. Thank you so much for diving into this explainer with me. Take this knowledge, draw your own lines, and go navigate the game wisely.